Hi, I'm Rodney with Don. I'm here with Kevin. He's a member of one of our installation teams. And today we're going to go over the installation of the RFX and RFX Plus actuator and manifold on a John Deere planter. We have here in the shop a 16-row ExactEmerge planter, one of the new planters from John Deere. And the first thing I want to talk about today is some of the tools that you're going to need for the installation. You're probably going to have a set of open-ended wrenches. Importantly, you will need a 1/2 inch, a 9/16, a 5/8, an 11/16, a 3/4, a 13/16, a 7/8, and a 15/16 wrench. You will need every single one of these wrenches for the installation. Additionally, you'll probably want to get yourself a crescent wrench. It's handy for when you have to get in there if you have two similar sized wrenches that you need, and also for the large nut on the top of the airbag cradle in order to remove the pneumatic device out of the airbag cradle. You're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. You also need a 3/8 open-end wrench in order to install the MyFX computer onto the mounting plate. In order to remove the existing mounting plate, you're going to want to get yourself a 1/2 inch socket set. To remove the load cell out of the John Deere planter, you'll want to have a pair of snap ring pliers with the 1mm ends on it in order to get into that small snap ring. You want to have yourself a pair of side cutters so that we can take care of zip ties. After we put them on, there will be a large number of zip ties that we'll need in order to tie down all of the cables and hoses that are affiliated with the RFX system. I do want to say a couple other things real quick about safety. It's important to us at Dawn that we're aware of some of the safety concerns that we have with installing a hydraulic system. We of course highly recommend a pair of safety glasses. It's very important that we try and protect our eyes, obviously, when we are working with hydraulic fluid, particularly when we're going to pressurize the system. And as a side note, I want to remind people, if they ever should experience a hose breaking or especially a pinhole break where hydraulic fluid breaks the skin, that you want to make sure that you go and see a physician right away. Hydraulic fluid breaking the skin can be extremely dangerous, and so we want to issue that word of caution to make sure that people who are taking care when they are installing these hydraulic tools. One other thing, our guys like to use a pair of knee pads. Saves the knees. We do recommend it also. Additionally, some shop towels. Your hands are probably going to get oily, and so you may want to have some shop towels around to keep yourself a little bit clean, because you can get oil all over the place real quickly. So with that, we're going to go over a brief overview of all of the different components that are going to go onto this 16-row, row-by-row installation for the RFX and the RFX Plus. Okay, so we're going to go over the installation of the RFX and the RFX Plus on this 1775 16-row 30 planter. What I'm going to do real quick is just do a brief overview of all the hoses that are going to be required, the hydraulic hoses. They're going to run down from the tractor, from the SCV, down the tractor to the back of the toolbar. Starting at the SCV, we have our Pioneer coupler. Okay, we're going to go on to a -6 JICN. You can see coming out of there and coming up to the first bulkhead. That's the bulkhead that's attached to the draft arm that's running back diagonally to the back of the toolbar. We're going to run our JIC into our hose that runs to the first bulkhead, the front bulkhead. At the bulkhead, thank you, Kevin. At the bulkhead, there's a nut here, of course, just like a standard bulkhead retainer, where we're going to put that through one of the holes in the bulkhead, and then we're going to attach our -6 JICN to the bulkhead adapter. Running down the draft arm, we're going to have this 3/8 hose. This is all 3/8 hose. We're going to have this 3/8 hose running down through the draft arm. Every one of our hydraulic hoses is going to have one of these shrink wrap protectors on it. What you want to do is you want to grab the black strip and you want to pull up, and that's going to remove it all the way to the top, so you can easily remove that protective plastic. Then this guy goes into your bulkhead fitting and runs through the draft arm. Okay? At the back end of the planter, we're going to have another bulkhead fitting. As is typical with most hydraulic systems, we're going to have a hydraulic fitting at either bulkhead so that we can replace hoses simply and not have to replace an entire hose from front to back should something get pinched. Once again, pull that guy off straight up. And we're going to attach to the rear bulkhead. From the rear bulkhead, we'll have another hose that runs to the center of the planter so that we can have oil come from the center and go out the wings so that we can bleed out at the ends of the wings. We want to make sure that we're not developing air pockets in the hydraulic fluid. So we run continuously from the center all the way out to the wings. At the back, this is where I'm going to recommend you put this, although you can put it anywhere. We have an oil filter so that we can make sure we're not getting any particulate into the system. Our valves, they can be a little bit sensitive to lots of particulate in the system, so we want to make sure that we have this filter in line. Kevin here is holding our mounting bracket. We want to make sure that it's installed up like this, in this orientation, where our filter is actually screwed in upward. It's very important that it's how it functions properly. Also, there's an arrow here that shows the direction of the oil flow. You want to make absolutely certain that you have the oil coming from the tractor, the pressure side, through here and out here, okay? And you can tell that, once again, by the arrow on the top. Then, if we're following our arrow, we have these two plugs, you pull them out, we're gonna put in another fitting. You can have either a JIC or an O-ring face seal fitting on here. Typically, we're gonna use a JIC because the hose ends are more common. We're going to plug that in here, and we're going to use a short JIC in order to run from this guy into our T, which also has a JIC in. Now, from the filter then, we're going to run from JIC to JIC, and then on this side, all of our hoses are O-ring face seal, -4 O-ring face seal. And so when we build our primary T, and we're using this large connector here because we don't want to orifice oil coming off the 3/8 hose. We want to make sure that we have it the same volume going all the way into our T, at which point we're going to step down to our 1/4 inch in either direction. So there's our little T. We run our hose out of our filter into this guy or directly out of the return line because we're going to have to run a return line, pressure and return line back to the back of the planter. We're going to have two of these hoses, two of each of the hoses that I just showed you, but one for pressure and one for return. The other important thing that I'm going to recommend people do is that you use the zip ties that should be provided in the box in order to mark the hoses, pressure and return, color code them so that you can tell easily which one is which. The convention is yellow is pressure, green is return. Once we come out of our T, we're going to start connecting our row by row hoses. All of our row by row hoses are -4 O-ring face seal, all with female ends. We're going to screw that into our primary T and begin our step down to the 1/4 inch hose. Evan here is attached our standard T that goes from row to row, and we simply are going to go from row to row, screwing these guys together, and then we'll have our drop that feeds pressure or returns oil off of those T's. You're going to have one of each of these going every row, every controlled row, all the way down the planter. There are, on most planters, a couple of odd spots where we have to run a long hose so that we can go around when the planter folds up. This is an example. This is a standard hose for most 1770 planters, 16 and 24 row. Also Bauer planters. Almost all planters that fold in a similar configuration are going to be using one of these 15-foot hoses to run from the center section back around and into the wing. So that is a brief synopsis of our hydraulic system. We're going to now move over to our electronic system, and then we'll go into the installation. So now we have all of our electronic components laid out on the table here, and we're going to go over it starting from front to back. where we're attaching to the battery, we're attaching to the implement bus, and we're running back to the back of the toolbar to connect all of the individual RFX and RFX Plus actuator and manifold together. This here is the RFX Plus actuator with the RFX actuator with the RFX Plus manifold. You can see here we have two hoses, return and pressure. The convention once again is pressure is yellow, green is return. You can see here our integral valve. That's where we have our wire coming in from the controller, the microcontroller, in order to drive this valve. One thing that's important to notice is that in the end of this valve there's a little set screw. This is our manual adjust mechanism. This allows you to set the pressure in the actuator even if we cannot get an electric signal out from the controller, so that you can keep going in the event that we have an electrical failure. Actually, one other important note that I want to mention: this cylinder is not retained, okay? And so we want to make sure that when we install this thing, we never want to pressurize this system without having first installed this fully into the airbag cradle. If you pressurize this, it will fire this rod right out of the end of the cylinder, okay? And so it's very important that we never pressurize the system until it is installed in the airbag cradle. And also with our, I want to make sure we have our cotter pins in the castellated nut on both sides so that it is thoroughly retained inside the cradle. So starting from the front of the planter, this is our main cable, our main power cable that's connecting to the battery. Here we have our two lugs. I like to connect it to the starter actually, and to the ground lug that's right there just on the front of the tractor. It's easier, and they stay, there's no corrosion on that typically on the starter. You can, however, connect it wherever you have power and ground. You can connect those wherever, up at near the battery. From that, we're going to go into our relay box here. We have a little power switch that comes up into the cab to energize this relay, to turn on the system, so that we're not always draining power. The MyFX controllers, if they're receiving power, they're drawing power. And furthermore, even if you have no other electronics connected, it's always trying to target the downforce. So if you plug it in and you don't have a switch, it's always going to be targeting downforce and drawing power from the battery. Coming out of this relay box, we have our primary power switch. This guy here plugs into our relay box, and it also plugs into our little switch that runs up into the cab. You run this through the back window of the tractor, and you have this little switch. It's an illuminated power switch. You simply click it on, click it off. It's illuminated blue when it's energized. Also, when the system is energized, this little red indicator is going to turn on. And so you can see in either place that we do have an energized system. So once we've energized the relay, we're going to have power coming out of this guy here. And this is going to run up to just around the SCV valve so that we can disconnect it from the tractor. And the way we're going to run it down the toolbar is we're going to run it into this T here. Oop, this side. The convention is that we're always going to have the plug energized. So you will always have it coming, power will always come from the plug with the sockets, and they'll go into the pins. That's just to prevent you from ever getting your finger in there and getting zapped. Okay, so you plug that in. Here's our T that's going to connect our CAN and our power. This here is our standard isobus breakaway connector that's going to bring our CAN signal up into the tractor so that we can pull that signal out of the diagnostics port in order to use our interface, our little tablet that we're going to use in order to control the MyFX controllers. This guy plugs in right here. And so now we have our CAN and our power connected, and we can have our power and CAN here, power ground, CAN high, CAN low, coming 4 wires that we're going to need in order to control the system and power the system. So they're going to first come into this bulkhead. In the same way that we have our hydraulic system hooked up, we're going to hook up our electronic system. We're running from that T that connects the power in the can to this bulkhead connector. So this is where we can detach our tractor from our planter with this connector right here. Then running through the draft arm, we have this heavy-duty cable. The convention for all of our electronic connections are red, black, yellow, green. Where red is plus, okay, this is our 12 volts or 13.5 volts, which is typical out of a tractor. This is our common. Yellow is can high, green is can low. Okay, this is the convention, and when you have, oh, there it is. So once you run this through the draft arm, we have difficulty, of course, getting something this large to the draft arm. So once you run it through the draft arm, the way you're going to connect up your coupler here, this little field wireable connector, is 1 is red, 2 is black, 3 is green, 4 is yellow. Okay, that's the convention across the board. 1 red, 2 black, 3 green, 4 yellow. And so as long as you always have all of those connected, or if you're ever trying to troubleshoot, it should always be in that configuration. That's going to go to the rear bulkhead, where we're going to connect on to our field wireable connector that we've just connected on here to our field wireable end. And this is going to run into the center of the planter. Thanks, Kevin. Here we're going to plug into this rear hub. And this is where we're going to send off our power and can in either direction down the planter. There are 3 types of row-to-row hoses, okay? The first type is going to be, oops, this one here. These larger ends, okay? These are the large, or 12 gauge, this comes off a 12 gauge wire. And this allows a 25 amps to come through, okay? And in the middle of the toolbar, especially in a row-by-row system, we want to have a little bit bigger cable so that we don't, we're not dropping too much power. And we don't want to heat up the cable either. So that amount of current, that every controller takes about half an amp maximum. Typically they're running at about 250 milliamps, okay? But they take half an amp maximum. So we want to make sure that we always have our wires gauged properly so that we're not going over an amperage that the wire can handle. So this is coming out of both sides, and they're going to tee off, and similarly we have 2 types of tees. This is our large tee. Once again, this is going to handle 25 amps. And you simply plug it in there, okay? And when we step down toward the outside of the planter, we have our second type of connector. This is our adapter cable, and this has a large end and a small end. This is going from 12 gauge to 16 gauge, okay, or 25 amps to 13 amps. So we're going to, once we get to that point, plug that in here. Kevin, if you could hold that for a second. And we'll step down to our smaller T. This is our 13 amp T, okay? And so as we go out to the outside of the planter, we require less current, and so we're going to step down our conductors. Our row-to-row is here. This has 2 small ends on it, and that's just used in the same way. And you can always see on the T's, and you won't be able to fit one into the other, so it should be evident which one goes which, but we're going to go over that in the installation. At the end of the toolbar, very importantly, you're going to need to install a terminating resistor into the end of the T, okay? That's just to tell the system that I'm at the end, and then it's not confusing itself as it sends signals up to the tractor. From the T, we're going to have our MyFX harness, okay? This is what's connecting to our load cell, to our lift switch, to our power and can at the T, to our microcontroller, and to the valve, okay? This is the MyFX microcontroller. One important thing is you want to make sure that you put some dielectric grease in here to preserve these terminals. It's included in the kit. You plug that in here. This sensor, this is your John Deere load sensor. You'll see how I install this after a little bit here. You connect these M12 connectors up to your John Deere load sensor. We have our lift switch, and this connects into your valve. That's your driver, and that energizes the valve, the solenoid in the valve. And this end of the cable, it's labeled drop. On the T, you want to plug that into your drop port. And you can see here, our trunk is black and our drop is gray. We just want to make sure that we never orient it so that we're trying to run power across through a drop. Okay, it's very important that we only have power go through the trunk. In the cab, you have your diagnostics port. The way we interface with the MyFX controllers is by plugging into that diagnostics port. We run it through this little converter box into a USB end. Okay? Thank you. That's going to plug into our little tablet. We do have a couple of different sizes of tablets that you guys can use. It's your prerogative, however you want to go with that. It just has to be a Windows-based tablet. Our current program is Windows-based. We are working on an iOS application, and it may be available for spring for some folks. That's spring 2015. But it definitely will be available for spring of 2016. But for right now, this is what we're using, and we'll have a couple of other options in the future as well as far as control of the MyFX system. So we've gone over all of the different hydraulic and electrical components, and now we're going to turn over to our 16-row planter, the ExactEmerge planter, and Kev Dog and myself, we're going to go over it, and we're going to install all of these tools. Okay, so now we're going to begin the installation of the RFX and the RFX Plus on this 1775 ExactEmerge planter, 16-row on 30 inches. We're going to start at the front, up at the tractor, where we're going to connect all of our electrical cables, and then we're going to do our connections, our hydraulic connections to the SCV. We're also going to talk briefly about some hydraulic alternatives to the SCV, real briefly. So once again, this is the John Deere ExactEmerge planter. There are some slight differences in the installation on the ExactEmerge and the Max 5 and the old Pro Series or XP units, John Deere XP units, if you're going to be equipping an older planter. So we'll move up to the front of the tractor here, and we will start installing our electronic components. Alrighty, now we're going to start with the installation. We're going to start up here at the front of the tractor, and we're going to connect directly into the battery somewhere. Typically, there's a couple of lugs where it's easy to get a hold of both the 13.5 volts that's coming off the battery and the common, the ground. So Kevin is going to help us out here. You go ahead and you pull off the battery cover. Usually comes off something like that. But on other tractors, you will want to locate the battery cover and remove that and get into the battery somehow so that we can begin installing our main power cable. Alrighty, so we got this housing off where the battery usually sets. You know, one of the options is you can connect directly up here to either side of the battery. It is very inconvenient to get in there in the back on the positive voltage. So right here, you're going to see a couple of lugs that are coming in that are a little more convenient to get at. You can get a 1/2-inch wrench on them so you can get the nuts off so that you can install on the positive side. Right here, you're going to see a common that's attaching a number of different components, electrical components, and the ground side of the battery. So here's where we can go on and hook on to our ground. Anywhere that's convenient, that's where I recommend you put it in. Don't try and get it up underneath the battery just so that you can have it connected to the battery. It's unnecessary, just as long as that we have our 13.5 volts that are coming off the battery. So we're going to get it installed here, and we're going to show you just after we get it installed kind of how we've set it up in here. The first thing we're going to do is take off this nut right here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a nut right here. We're going to take that off. That's going to be our 13.5 volts. We're going to take this off. I do not have any metric wrenches. Now that is one small inconvenience. All Dawn tools are installed with standard units. And many of the John Deere components are obviously metric. So you will probably in some cases need to have some of those metric wrenches. Here's where that thumb wrench is going to come in handy, because we can get on here without having to pull out our metric wrench set. Okay? So we'll get it on here and we'll give you an overview of it once we get it on. Alright, well, we're going to run this cable here from the back of the tractor to the front of the tractor so that we can hook it on to the battery lugs. Sometimes it's a little bit more tricky. This is one of the more tricky jobs. We do have to get up underneath the tractor in order to route it through the tractor in a convenient spot so that it's not getting into articulating or rotating components of the tractor. We want to make sure that we never get ourselves in a position where we can cinch or pinch this electronic cable. In this case, there is a little through port where hydraulic hoses are running, where we're going to connect our electronic cable through. We're going to run from the back of the tractor forward because it's easier to get these little terminals through than it is to get this big connector through. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here above the SCV. I'm going to run back down and over top of the axle of the rear wheel here. Okay? And we're going to go up underneath. We're going to take you underneath the tractor, and we're going to show you how we route it underneath the tractor. So here we are underneath the tractor. This is probably the worst part of this whole job. You got to get up underneath here. Here's our cable coming from the back of the tractor. We're going to run it along with this existing hydraulic cable, and we're going to zip tie it on. Okay? Then, in this case, and you probably can't quite see it where you are. I'll try and bring the camera up and show it here. But there is a little port here that's typically reserved for holding your hydraulic line. I'm going to go ahead and slip this guy through here. And we're going to have to get this a little bit loose here. Okay, we got it through our little through port here. And there's a hole right here in the chassis. We're going to stick it through that hole. We're going to reach our hand in up here through here. And we're going to pull it through. Once again, just trying to keep it out of getting caught up on any residue in the field or getting caught up in any articulating parts or anything else. I'm going to pull this entire assembly up through this thing here. So now we got here. Now this is where we have another entrance so that we can get up into the where the battery sets in the tractor. So I'll have Kevin come up around. He's going to send down a fish tape. We're going to pull this up through. Okay, here's our fish line that Kevin has fed down through for us. Well, let's go ahead and hook our terminals on. Can do that. There we go. Got it. Can you pull it up? Thank you. A little bit. There we go. You have them?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there we go. Now all we have to do is connect it up top to the battery and tie strap it off to our hydraulic lines. Okay, so now we are connected to the battery. You can see here we've connected our common, our negative, up here to this lug here, where we are connected directly into the battery. And also back here, there is a cable that's connected onto the 13.5 volts off the battery that's coming up here. We're connected to the lug on the other side. So that's all you need to do. Just as long as you're connected somehow to the battery, you're good to go. One word of caution I want to mention is when you're in there undoing one of the positive terminal lugs, try and remember that most of the chassis is ground. Okay, and so if you touch your wrench from one side to the other, you're gonna shoot some sparks. So just be careful when you're in there with a wrench, so that you're not firing sparks over, in particular if you have any type of flammable liquids or anything else around that might cause a fire. Typically that 12 volts isn't going to hurt you, although if you do charge something up, you could zap yourself a little bit. So just be careful when you're in there with that wrench, okay? Here we are at the back of the tractor again. We're going to connect up our relay box onto our primary power that's coming from the battery cable that we just installed. Hand this up here to Kevin. Circular connectors, you just screw them on. This cable is the cable, the main power cable that's coming out of our relay box. Okay. Here's our switch cable. This is the cable that runs up into the cab that connects to our power switch. Here's the T that's going to connect our ISO bus, this is our CAN bus, to our power. And so we got a 3-pin here that's going to come in on this side, and we have our 4-pin is on the other side going out to the planter. One of the things that you want to note is you got to have these things perfectly parallel to each other, or you can't have a little trouble. Just like with any other nut or bolt, you can have a little trouble. If things cocked a little bit, it's tough to get it threaded on. So just make sure that when you're putting these things together that they are parallel to one another like this, and it should thread on extremely easy after that. Also, these both can move on the connector. So once it's parallel, it should thread on very easily. Now here is our ISOBUS breakaway connector. That's going to also feed into our T here. And the ISOBUS breakaway goes into the standard ISOBUS breakaway port. If you already have a ISOBUS cable going in there, we do have a splitter available, and you simply plug it in there, and we're going to split those two off, and we'll put one into each side of the Y splitter that we have for the ISOBUS. Okay, now we have one last cable that we're going to want to connect before we have to worry about connecting up here to our bulkhead and starting to run down the diagonal, the draft arm here. This is the first of our 4-pin connectors. The same way, you want to make sure that we get those guys parallel. And once you have it parallel, it easily screws together. And here we are. Now, this is typically where someone's going to disconnect from the planter, at the T here. Okay, that's the most convenient place because we're actually going to be bolting our first bulkhead connector right here to the bulkhead plate. In just a minute, we're going to have another one of our installation team, Mark. He'll be over here with a mount that we're going to first drill a hole into the bulkhead if a hole does not already exist there. We're going to put our plate on there so that we can run into the bulkhead. Okay, so here we are in the tractor cab. We have a couple of extra components that we need to install here in the tractor cab. One is our switch. That's our on-off switch for the entire system. And the other is we have to connect up our tablet using the diagnostics port plug here and our USB cable. So I have Kevin outside here. He's going to hand me our cable. Thanks, Kevin. We're going to put it through the window grommet here. And we're going to attach our M12 switch. You can put this wherever you see fit, just wherever it's convenient. Once it's on, you don't really have to mess with it anymore, so if you want to just place it down to the side, that's just fine. Now, most modern tractors are going to have a diagnostics port that have this 9-pin Deutsch connector, or it's also Sign Systems makes this similar kind of connector, 9-pin circular connector. So in this case, it's right here on this tractor. Sometimes the port is down here, okay, next to the power. We'll simply take this, we're going to plug that in to our 9-pin connector. And then we have our Windows tablet. This is a WinBook. You can use a Surface Pro or smaller WinBooks if you want a smaller tablet. Also, if you'd like to RAM mount it, we will send you a RAM mount so that you can RAM mount it up anywhere that you'd like inside of your cab. once this machine is working though, it doesn't really require much interface, so if you choose, you can always have this down to the side as well and pull it out when you're going to need it to make an adjustment out in the field. We do have a nice little ram mount though if you want to set that off to the side there and have a constant viewing. And also then we do have a little monitor on there that allows you to see what the downforce is at any time across the toolbar. Okay, so we've completed all of our installation of electronic components on the tractor. We're going to start heading back now to the toolbar again. We're going to run our electric back to the back of the toolbar, and we're going to start connecting row units. So now we're going to do another of the less convenient jobs of this install, and that is running our electric and hydraulic cables up through the draft arm. Now we're going to start off with our electric cable. We're going to do our hydraulic cable now too, just because we like to go ahead and get all of the fish taping and hose pulling and cable pulling out of the way all together. And then we'll go back, after we get all the electronics installed, we'll go back and we'll also install the hydraulics up at the front of the tractor here. So the first thing that we typically do, there's a lot of hoses in most cases. We're going to snip off the zip tie that's on there so that we have a little bit of freedom. And then a lot of guys would like to stick a wrench in there and just kind of push those cables, the existing hydraulic and electric cables down and out of the way just a little bit so that we can get our electric cable up through there. We do have a 1/2-inch cable that needs to come through. And 2 other 1/2-inch hoses that are going to have to come through on one side or the other. So the first thing we'll do then is we'll come up here, and remembering that we're going to be going in this direction. We want to start at the front of the toolbar and move rearward. This is going to be at the rear of the toolbar. So from the front end, we'll stick our wire through and we'll push it through. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run a fish tape from the rear forward so that we can grab hold of it and push it through. Okay, we're back. I'm here with Kevin again, and this is Mark. He's another one of our installation guys. Mark just went over and fabricated a little bulkhead plate. Now, we don't have an absolutely standard bulkhead plate because there's so many different variations on planters. This is one of the things that we are going to recommend that you do custom at your shop. If you do need help with it, you can certainly call Dawn and we can send you one of the various plates that we might have available for your planter. In this case, we do have this one that Mark has fabricated. We have some other plates that are standard plates, bulkhead plates, but probably the easiest thing for you to do, and so that it's in a convenient spot for you, we're going to go ahead and recommend that you fabricate your own bulkhead plate. But once again, if you don't want to fabricate that plate, go ahead and give us a call, and we'll make sure that we get something out and you go ahead and try and install that. This one here is we're going to have back here. Mark is also working on another plate really quick. This one will go back here, and we're going to run it right over top. We're going to pop a couple of holes right here in the bulkhead plate, and we're going to install it in these 2 bolt holes that we have here in our fabricated plate. And then we'll have one up front. And so while Kevin and I are going to pull this down the draft arm, Mark is going to continue to fabricate these plates. He's going to get them ready to go so that we can attach them to the bulkhead. Okay, so Mark is off. He's fabricating our plates for the front end here, but what we're going to do is we're going to start running our electric cable down through the draft arm. We got our fish wire up through here, and so we're going to go ahead and attach that. Pardon me, Kevin. We're going to go ahead and attach that to our cable. Okay. Once again, the field wireable end is the one we're going to connect to our fish tape and feed it down through the draft arm. One thing that you want to make sure of is that you get that tape all the way tight to the fish tape on this side and don't have an overlap. Otherwise, your field wireable end might catch on something inside. There's sometimes zip ties and other things inside the draft arm that it can catch on. So make sure you get that tape all the way down to the over top of the fish tape itself, your connecting tape. In this case, electric tape. Although, of course, duct tape works very well. And then we got to fight it in there. We're going to pull it through until we're all the way up to our connector here, okay? Now, we do send out a standard size for these. The 1775 NT 16 row does have a slightly shorter draft arm, but we do have a single component for all planters, and this includes the Bauer planters and the 24 row 1770 NT. So we want to make sure that we're just kind of following up. Always try and follow, whenever you're installing these, either the cables or the hoses, try and follow the loop that exists based on where you're going to have your bulkhead cable, which is going to be right about here. So Kevin, if you can pull just a little bit more through there. Okay, there we go. Come back just a little bit. But we definitely want to roughly follow the path of the rest of these guys. So if there's plenty of slack, we don't want to have too much slack so that we get into something on either side. So now we have this length of cable that's coming out of the rear of the draft arm, okay? On the 1775 NT and all of the 5 planters, 75, 95, 85, we're going to have a bulkhead plate somewhere right around here. On the Bauer planters, your DB60s and higher, you're going to have a bulkhead plate somewhere right around in here. This allows for a variety of different planter configurations, sizes, and locations of bulkhead plates. So what we're going to do is we're going to feed it through here. There's these little loops, the protective loops right here. We're going to feed our cable through there. And then we're going to continue, we're going to follow, we're always going to follow the existing electronic and hydraulic cabling. Another gathering loop right here. We're going to feed it through. Once again, we're going to follow. We just want to follow exactly with the rest of our hydraulic hoses and cabling. And then right about here is where we're going to have our bulkhead plate attached. This is where we're going to pick up our field wireable end, and we're going to get ready to wire it on. Now, there are a couple things you can do. Some folks will choose to just loop this around so that they don't have to remove any length of cable. Today I'm going to actually remove a length of cable. And the first thing that we need to do is get ourselves a razor blade so that we can cut it in the appropriate spot. We want to make sure that we have about 2 inches of wire that's hanging out of the end. So we're going to cut it up here at the bulkhead and about even. And that will give us our 2 inches that we're going to need that's going to be required for the inside of the connector. And now here we have our field wireable end. We're going to cut off our 1.5 to 2 inches off the end. It's very important you either have a very sharp knife or a box cutter. Box cutter, I feel, is probably the easiest way to do it. If you have a dull knife, you may damage your cables pretty easily. You want to be very, very careful when you cut this coating off, because if we cut into our power cable or a ground cable, we are going to remove some of that insulation, and we can cause ourselves some problems later on, causing a short across those 2 lines. So we're going to be very, very careful when we're cutting apart this coating, the insulation on the outside of our cable. We know that this is about exactly correct to go onto our field wireable end. So you may just want to go ahead and match this up, lay your razor down or your knife down, and make your mark. So now we've got this up, we got it ready to go into our bulkhead, and we have our wires stripped. We want to cut off about 3/8 of an inch right here. 1/2 of an inch is just a little bit too much, 1/4 is a little bit too short. We want to have about 3/8 of an inch to go into our field wireable connector. What we want to do is, after we have stripped back that wire, we want to twist it tight. Twist it tight. Twist all 4 wires tight. cut it just a little bit longer than 3/8 of an inch. And then you can take a nice small snip like this, if you have one, and cut it off so that we have a nice flat end. So if it comes loose when you're snipping it off, just go ahead and give it one more quick twist. Same with our can. And I'll remind you now that red is 1, black is 2, green is 3, yellow is 4. It's going to be just a little bit confusing in our field wireable connector here, because in our field wireable connector, 1 is black, 2 is green, 3 is red, and 4 is white. Okay? This is outside of our convention. I'd tear this off, but it shouldn't matter. What's important is what we have right here. And it's always the case, regardless of the colors, do not go by the colors on the field wireable connector. They will be incorrect, okay? It must be based on what I'm saying here. 1 is red, 2 is black, 3 is green, 4 is yellow. Now, with the field wireable connector, it comes with this little Allen wrench, okay? We're going to loosen up all 4 of our field wireable connector lugs here. We want to make sure that this is in here only far enough, not too far. We want to have it so that it's flush. You may be able to push it down further, but we do not want to get our set screw into the insulation, okay? So we're going to push it down. If you have cut it at 3/8 of an inch, it should go down and be flush right against there. Like you can see here, I'm pushing it down, there it is flush. And it's all the way seated against the bottom of the channel there. We'll go ahead and screw on the first of our field wireable connectors. But we shouldn't do that until, of course, we put on the back of the connector. Which is very important, don't forget to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our little connector end. There's 2 grommets inside of our connector here. You have to pry this grommet out. It's actually this one, this grommet is the one you're going to be using. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to take and run your wire through there. So this is, and once you cinch it down, this will be tight. This grommet will be tight around that cable, okay? Then we have this end here. This is the one that we're going to need to, this is the one that cinches down on the grommet, okay? It's got these little fingers on it. So the first thing we'll put on is this guy here, and I've done it backwards again. So these are the correct steps. You put on the nut first, then you take your grommet, you put on your grommet, then you take your housing, your primary housing, you put it through, okay? And you're going to want to feed it so that the grommet seats into the teeth, these little fingers on the back of that connector. And you can bring it up and you can place the nut so that it's started on there. Don't tighten it down or it'll tighten where it is. We're going to just real quick make sure that these guys are back together. We never want to have any copper coming back, because we can have even one little piece of copper going across can short out our system, okay? And we want to try and avoid that if we possibly can. So here we go, back to what we were doing. All the way up to the insulation. We take our Allen wrench. Use our Allen wrench. There we go. Make sure it is very secure on there, okay? Don't bend your Allen wrench, but get it very secure on there. It's extremely important that these things don't come loose in the field. There's going to be a lot of vibration back here, and we want to make sure that we have those very tight. Now you can see there what I did. I started putting that in, and I have my copper all knackered. There's a potential that you're going to, if you do this, that you're going to have a short. Make sure that you ever, if that happens, that you try and redo it, okay? It's very important that this bundle stays together, so you want to be very careful about how you're placing this into your port. Once again, black is number 2. I'm going to be just a little bit more careful about how I do it this time. And there we go. It's going to seat all the way in there. You can see that our insulation is stopping right at the exact right spot. And we're going to tighten down on number 2. Let's see if we can drop the Allen wrench once for every wire here. Once again, we're going to tighten down snug, tight on that. Okay. Pull these guys through here. And now 3 is green. Number 3 in here. 3 sits just a little bit further down than I'd like it to, so I'm going to bring it up so the insulation is resting on that lip here of this little fitting. Okay? I'm going to screw it down. Once again, we don't want to have our set screw try and go through the insulation. I'm going to make sure our set screw is attached to copper. Very tight, without bending your Allen wrench. So again, sometimes you got to feed wires through in order for them to be in a good position for you to get them in. And then our last wire, number 4, is yellow. Oh, caught it that time. Okay, so we've got these all very tight in here. Go ahead and give them a quick pull. Make sure that they're all very tight. Go ahead and give green one more quick snug here. It's extremely important that they are all secure in there. Okay? So now we have them all connected. We're going to bring up our housing, release it from the nut. We're going to bring it up here, and we're going to tighten our housing down over top of the connector end. Make sure it's fully seated so that the O-ring seals the connector. Make sure the grommets fully seated in the back of the housing. And then go ahead and get your nut started and nut on. And it's unlikely you're going to get it all the way up to the top because it starts cinching down on there. And you can see now how tight it is. That grommet is tight to the cable. Go ahead and give it a firm snug. Okay? Not too firm, you big guys, okay? Just we want to make sure that it's seated and so that we have a nice seal on the grommet in the back of the connector. And there we are. We're ready to push it into the bulkhead here. You know, if you don't like the length, it's always better to cut long and then have to go back and make it a little bit shorter, okay? I think in this case, if we just push it down like this, we have pretty much the perfect amount of length right here for because we're going to install this guy right here, all right? Now, from here, we're going to stretch our cable back to the center of the planter. We're going to connect to our rear hub. In just a minute, Mark will be done fabricating the bulkhead plates, and we're going to show how we're going to install those. But before we do that, I'm going to run that hose from here, that cable from here, we're going to run it back to the center of the planter. So we're at the last of our primary cables that are going to the back of the planter here. There's one important thing that I want to note when I'm talking about running this cable and the hydraulic hoses here in this center section. When you fold up your planter on a 1700 series planter, okay, including the 1775, we're extremely close up here to the handles that are coming out of the seat hopper, okay? So it's very important that we get both our electronic cables and our hydraulic hoses fed through here with the rest of the hydraulic hoses and electronic cables. There's a little Velcro shielding right here. We want to make sure that we get into that so that we keep it away from these handles that are allowing us to get into our seat hopper. So we're going to go ahead and run this cable. As soon as we're going to go ahead and get this stuff off, and we'll give you a quick shot of it as soon as Kevin and I are able to get it off and get this new cable on. That goes from the bulkhead here, the rear bulkhead, into the center of the planter so that we can tee off to our row-by-row components. Okay, well Kevin is now feeding this cable through here. You can see up here, if you want to step up a little closer here, you can see up here that we have our little fabricated bulkhead plate. This is where we're connecting our electrical connector. Here's our field wireable end. And put this guy in here. So there we go. Keep this back just a little bit. Just a tiny bit of slack. Run that into the draft arm. Drop it down. And there we go. We're nicely following right through into our bulkhead, down to our draft arm and up to the front. Now up here, going back to Mark. Mark's about to drill a hole here, but he's got our other bulkhead plate. You know, this is going to be one of those times where you may very well have to drill a hole in your bulkhead so that we can get another one of our bulkhead plates on here. This is another quick one that Mark has fabricated. Here we go. He's got a couple little holes here. In the bulkhead on the 1775 16 row, there is a tiny little hole here. We can use that to put through our little bulkhead plate here. Okay, we're going to set that up here. Mark's going to drill another hole so that we can keep this thing from rotating. That's why we have the two holes here. So he's going to do that real quick. We'll connect that up. Kevin's going to run that back through there, and then we'll connect up to our rear hub so that we can start running our electronics down from row to row. Okay, so we have one more connection to make here. We're at the front end of the planter. Mark's got our other bulkhead plate up here. We're going to go ahead, unthread our nut. There's a little O-ring here. Not really important in this capacity, but that's okay. Just leave it where it is. We're going to screw that on. We're going to screw our nut on. You want to make sure that you get a wrench on this. Tighten that down. Is that going to fit? Straighten that. That's okay. I think you need 1.5" wrench for this. That's okay. That's what we're going to do. We have the draft arm cable on the front end. We're going to plug that in here. Everything's connected. Now all we have to do is tie strap everything up, and everything is connected up to the tractor. And now all we have to do is go back to the rear of the toolbar. We're going to connect our primary cable here off of the rear bulkhead, and then we'll start teeing our electric lines off to the row-by-row units. Okay, somewhere in the center of the planter here in the back, we're going to want to tee off. This is our row-to-row tee that I showed you in the beginning of the video. Okay, the primary tee that's coming in. This is coming in once again from the draft arm in the back of the planter at the bulkhead. We're going to connect that up. And you want to go ahead and place this somewhere up in the center, preferably right in the center of the toolbar, so that we can easily move from one row to the next. There happens on the 1775, there happens to be a nice little spot right here. And so that's where we're going to set it. We're going to zip tie that off here, and we're going to start running our electronics from row to row. But before we do that, we're going to install our hydraulic system. The hydraulic hoses that have to go from the SCV back to the draft arm and back to the center of the planter, and also connect the filter for the system. So we'll go ahead and get that set up. We'll go ahead and we'll connect all the hydraulics, and then we'll begin doing our row by row, both the hydraulics and the electronics. Okay, so we've got all of our electronics installed back to the back of the planter. We're now going to go ahead and start routing our hydraulic hoses from the SCV back to the back of the planter as well. We're going to start with our pressure. There's 3 wrenches that you'll need for this job: 1 1/16, 7/8, and 11/16. Here's our adapter that's going to go to our Pioneer coupler, the -6 JIC male on one end. We're going to put that into our short 3/8 inch JIC end here. It's a 3/8 inch hydraulic hose. Screw that in. With the JICs, you probably already know you want to make sure you get those really tight. The O-ring face seal, they'll almost hold pressure at finger snug, although definitely make sure you tighten them down. But the JICs in particular, you want to make sure that you get them down there really tight. There we go. Find your coupler. Same way with the O-ring boss, you want to make sure you get it pretty snug on there. Okay, and there we have one of our hoses. We're going to have to make 2 of those. Kevin has already made our other one over here. It sits over here. Oh, there it is. Okay, and so one of the first things, and this is a thing I'll encourage everyone to do, we're going to send along with the set some zip ties. And we want to make sure that we mark these pressure and return with yellow and green zip ties. Okay, we're going to make sure that we mark these guys. Yellow is pressure, green is return. We want to mark both ends so that we can tell when we run into the SCV, and also when we're running hoses back. If we ever need to trace stuff back, it's very helpful to have those zip ties on there. Okay, so there's our pressure and our return. Okay, now there is limited space in the draft arm, of course, and so we're going to run our pressure up one side and we're going to run our return up the other. We already have a fish tape that's been stuck through here, and so we're going to go ahead and first of all connect this up to our SCV port, or I should say our bulkhead right here. This will go up to your SCV. And incidentally, if you do not have an SCV, you can use the power beyond to control this. You want to make sure that you have some type of flow restrictor on there so that you only have enough flow to control the system. Any additional flow is going to go across relief. It's going to heat up your oil. And so we want to make sure, if you don't have an SCV available, that you are restricting flow somehow. We officially recommend that you do use an SCV valve. It is nice to be able to control that flow. You only want to have as much flow as necessary, and it's nice to have that control up in the cab so you can fine-tune that in as you're moving along. So we'll run return on this side. There's a couple other return lines here, so we'll go ahead and run return on this side. You can see a pressure over there. We're going to run pressure on that side. Now what we have up here, there's a small hole and a lot of bulkhead plates up here, and we have our bulkhead fitting. We're going to go ahead, we're going to have this available hole. If there's not an available hole, you can go ahead and drill a hole in there. In this case, we do have an available hole, so we're going to push through. And we'll install the bulkhead fitting. Okay, Kevin's already installed the one on the other side. Thank you. You know, tighten that down with 13/16 wrench. And then we'll go ahead and we want to make sure, once again, that we're running our hydraulic hose along with the rest of the hydraulic hoses. We want to zip tie those all together so that we don't get it into any pinch points. Okay, once again, making sure we get that JIC nice and snug. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead, we're going to string our return hose, we're going to string the return hose down the draft arm, and then we'll hook up the cable to the center of the planter, the hydraulic hose from the center of the planter on this rear bulkhead. Okay, in the same way that we ran our electric line through, we're going to go ahead and we want to make sure we tape down over top of here so that we kind of have a point on the end here. We don't want to allow this hydraulic end to catch on anything. So just a little trick of the trade, you want to make sure that you tape down over top of the fish tape and then up around the fitting. And then also at the top of the fish tape here, we want to make sure that we have this end covered. All the way across the hook, so that we're not getting it caught up on any hydraulic hoses, zip ties inside of there, or anything else that might be inside the draft arm. String this through, and then we'll show you on the back of the bulkhead here. Okay, so we've run our return hose down the draft arm here. We run it up through here, through our loops here, and into the bulkhead, the rear bulkhead plate. Once again, we have another bulkhead fitting, and it is a convention on a John Deere planter that on the left wing we're going to have return, on the right wing we're going to have pressure. And so we're just kind of keeping with that convention. As a general rule, you know, you have some kind of mismatching here and there, but as a general rule, we want to see, when we match up return, green, 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 you can see here. And in this case, on this particular planter, we've also had our electronics. If you recall, we ran our electronics back to this bulkhead. We're going to do the same thing for the pressure on the other side. And with that, we pretty much run all of our hydraulics. We're going to go into the rear now. We're going to install our filter, our 5 micron filter for sending out oil, for filtering oil that's going out to the row units. And then we're going to go to our row by row connections. Okay, so we've run all our hydraulics back to the back of the planter now, and before we attach from our bulkhead, the hose that runs from our bulkhead back here, we got to make sure that we've installed our filter. This is another one of those kind of custom things, depending on planter. You just got to put it wherever you can get it. We want to get it as close to the center as possible. In this case, on the 1775-16 row, we've gone ahead and stuck it behind the flying W of the planter row unit right next to the center. Okay? You can kind of see that hopefully back in there. That's our mounting plate. So we have installed this mounting plate for our filter right here behind this row unit, behind the flying W of this row unit. We're making sure that we're very close to the center section of the toolbar. Once again, I want to remind you that the flow has to go in the direction of the arrow on the filter. We're going to install this. Additionally, we want to make sure that the filter end is actually down. Okay, it's important that it's oriented in this direction. There's a little cutout in the mounting plate that's going to allow you to put it up in here. Okay, we're going to take our fittings for the filter. These are -6 JIC ends. We're going to screw that into the receiving port here. O-ring boss, we want to make sure once again that we're getting them good and tight, so we have a good seal. And then we'll go ahead and install this in this orientation into our mounting plate. Okay, I've got it set up here. I'm going to go ahead and tighten down. It's going to take a 9/16 to tighten these bolts, so we make sure we get it good and snug onto our mounting plate. We don't want it to vibrate off. Okay, so we have our filter installed here, and now we're going to have to run up, and out of that filter we're going to have to tee off to our row by row. This right here is just a short hose, JIC, -6 JIC. We're going to screw it into the out arrow side of our filter, which in this case is right here. Okay? And now from here, here's where we're going to have our tee. We have a little angle JIC right here, and then we have our O-ring face seal. And there we are. Here are our O-ring face seal adapters. So I'm going to show that to you. this we're going to step down to our dash 4 and 1/4 inch hose. And there we are, and we're ready to tee off from row to row. We want to go ahead and stick that right in the middle of the toolbar. And then we're just going to tee off row to row with our hydraulics and the pressure. We're going to do exactly the same thing with our return line that's coming in. I should say going out. Screw in our adapters. Recall from before when we routed our return line up that draft arm, it's come across the center, and we're going to go into the T that is not connected to our filter. And then we'll have our return go out row to row in either direction. And that is the rest of our central components for this system. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over the row by row installation. You can see we've already started to install some of the RFX Plus manifolds into this planter. I'm going to bring you over here now and we'll go over how to install one of the RFX and RFX Plus manifolds and then how to route the hoses and electronics. Okay, so now we're going to do one of our row by row installations here. A couple other important tools that I want to note for this part of the job. Pry bar is very handy to have. Sometimes we've got to nudge row units around a little bit. Sometimes we've got to pry up on the actuator itself to get it into position. The seals are extremely tight when these come. They're going to break in quickly, but they can be very tight when they first come to you. So you may have to run a pry bar up underneath the actuator, making certain that you don't disturb the surface finish of the rod itself. It's very important that we don't get any mars or scrapes along the surface finish of the rod. So with that, we'll go over what it's going to take here. First thing you're going to want to do is uninstall the airbag out of the airbag cradle. Another handy thing to do is across the planter, you may want to go ahead and undo the seed tube here and put that back over top. And then what we're going to do is we'll undo our hairlines. Okay, we'll take those out. Now here's the case where you have a little bit larger nut that you have to remove than you're going to see in your standard wrench set. And so what we typically do is use a thumb wrench to loosen that up. Additionally, if you happen to have a curve time wrench, it happens to fit on there very nicely. And we can loosen that up. We'll have to remove the fitting in order to remove the nut. That goes. Okay, so now we're ready to install our cylinder. I want to remind you guys once again, don't ever apply pressure to this if we have not secured the nut, both top and bottom, on our actuator. Nothing retains this rod. So it will fire out of the cylinder if you do pressurize it without having it retained. Reminder that yellow is pressure, green is return. So what we'll do is we'll remove the castellated nuts on the top and on the bottom of the actuator. You're going to want to install the bottom first so that you can pull up on the actuator and get it to seat into the cradle. There are a couple of components that are important for this spherical bushing. Okay, there you see that comes up against the bottom end of our rod here, this curved surface on the bottom end of our rod, and then we have this metal washer that receives that curved bushing. Underneath the cradle, you're going to have a small rubber washer and a small metal washer. So this goes on the top of the cradle, this goes underneath the cradle. We'll go ahead and set our actuator in here. Also, this has already been installed. This is something you will have to install. This is the anti-rotation piece. You'll see this included in the kit. We want to make sure this is screwed in with 2 1/4-inch button head cap screws. But this is very important to keep the actuator from turning in the cradle. Now, as I said before, this can be extremely tight. Those cylinders can be extremely tight, the rods inside of the cylinder housing. So it may take you may have to really pick up hard on this actuator in order to get it up into the airbag cradle. Sometimes you give it a little twist, it'll go up in there. There we go, just like that. So this one is free. We also have an upper support here. That large metal washer with the circular spherical cutout, and then this spherical bushing. Pull that up through the hole. On the top as well, we have a rubber washer and then a metal washer. And we're going to retain it with a castellated nut. Now, when you're screwing it down, it's very important that we do not compress the rubber. This rubber is what allows us to kind of move around as this thing runs up and down. We don't ever want to have it get caught up. So, because then we're going to have, if we ever have mechanical components getting caught up, that's where we can start causing damage to either the row unit or to the actuator itself. So we're going to tighten that only until it just slightly begins compressing the rubber. We want to make sure that we have that washer, that metal washer, up tight against the top of the cradle. It usually works so that the top of the castellated nut should be about flush with the top of the rod that's coming out of the top of the airbag cradle. And then we're going to take a cotter key, we're going to bend it over to retain that castellated nut. So now we have the actuator installed. Once again, you want to make sure that you have the cotter keys installed both top and bottom. Kevin here is going to install the cotter key and bend it over. Okay. So that's set to go. Now all we have to do is run from both our electronics and our hydraulics out row to row. So we're going to go through a couple of rows of installation on that. And once we get all of our hoses connected, we are complete with this installation. So we'll go ahead and start installing the row by row hoses and the row by row cable. Okay, so now we're going to install a couple of the row by row components. The first component we're going to install is the John Deere load sensor. John Deere load sensor comes in this box here. Now, important to note that this is an exact merge planter. These load sensors were made, the ones that we have that we're sending out right now, were made for the Pro Series unit. And so the one thing that we're going to have to do is on the Max 5 unit, we have this is a more narrow handle that goes into our depth setting, okay? And so we're going to have to replace this handle with this handle on our load cell. There's a snap ring inside of here. You remove that, you take out the spring, you pull that out, and you stick in your new handle. So in order to remove the existing walking tandem bar here, okay, that's regulating depth on the gauge wheels, we're going to take off this snap ring here, you're probably familiar with that, and we're going to also remove this gauge wheel so that we can get it out of there. In particular on the exact merge planters, you're going to have to remove the gauge wheel in order to get the existing walking tandem depth stop out of there. This is one place where an impact wrench is going to be very handy. Okay, so to change this out, once again, we're just going to take our snap ring plier, we'll stick it in there. This one does take a little bit bigger snap ring plier than the one that allows you to remove this. There we go. Pull it off. Probably a place where you might want to wear some safety glasses. Okay, Kevin's going to hold this while I try and get this snap ring on here. Okay, so we've reinstalled our new handle for the Exact-Emerge planter onto our load sensor. We're going to go ahead and reinstall it back in the planter roll unit. Okay, so we've reinstalled our load sensor. So now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the gauge wheel on the planter roll unit. We have installed our load sensor. Now the last thing we're going to have to do is route that electronic cable up through our planter roll unit. So go ahead and remove your housing. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to take our load sensor cable and there's a channel that runs through the top here, and we want to try and get our electronic cable up through there so that we don't run the risk of it catching on anything inside the opener blades. Okay, so we have installed and gotten our cable run up through the planter roll unit here, past the seed meter, and the next thing we're going to have to do is install our lift switch bracket. Then we're going to install our RFX controller. Alrighty, so now we're going to install the mount for the lift switch and the lift switch. You're going to need to use a number 6 screw, machine screw that we supplied. This is on the Exact-Emerge roll unit only. So if you come down here with me, you can see here there's a couple of little holes here in the front of the Exact-Emerge roll unit. Okay, now we have our bracket installed. We're going to go ahead and put our lift switch in. So what you want to do to get your lift switch in, you want to go ahead and stick your finger behind there so you don't lose your nut. And go ahead and screw the proximity switch into the nut. Now, leaving the top loose, we're going to go ahead and screw the proximity switch until it comes in contact, and this is, importantly, it's when the roll unit is all the way down at the bottom of travel. You screw this in until we're coming in contact with the flat on the cross member of the lower parallel link. Once we do that, we're going to screw this up just a little bit, and we're going to screw the top nut down. Now we want, at this point, we want about between a 1/16 of an eighth and an 1/8 of an inch from the cross member to the proximity switch. That's very important that we get it no more than an 1/8 of an inch close to the cross member of the lower cross member of the parallel link. Now we're going to use two 15/16 wrenches to tighten this proximity switch onto the mounting plate. It is very important that these nuts are extremely tight. We can't have this thing moving up or down, so make sure you get them good and snug. Okay, so now we have our proximity switch installed. You can see here how we have just under an 1/8 of an inch between the cross member of the lower parallel link and the proximity switch. Okay, now we're going to get our computer. Okay, now we're going to install our RFX controller, our microcontroller. One important note is that if you do have an older planter, you're going to be using a mounting plate like this. This is where you're going to install your lift switch, and it's going to bolt onto your planter roll unit. Right here, where on the Exact-Emerge roll unit, we have this front shield, the plastic shielding. Okay, we're going to bolt it right into this bolt hole. And that's for any of the earlier Pro Series or Max XP row units. You're going to be using this mounting plate. In this case, since we already have this housing on the Exact-Emerge planter, we're just going to go ahead and set this computer right in here at the front of the housing. Okay? Now, the way that we're going to have these computers set, you can see here in the bottom, there's a couple of little dials with numbers on them. This is how we're going to set the address. And the way that we set the address is we simply make it so that it's the row that we're on. In this case, we're on row number 4. So we're going to take either a knife or preferably a small screwdriver. We're going to set it to 4, 0, 4 in this case. So we'll turn this, make sure that it clicks so that you hear that click. And here you can see we have 0 and 4. Also importantly, when we're going to be installing these controllers is we want to make sure that these terminals inside are protected. So we're going to take some dielectric grease. If you have not been supplied dielectric grease, you want to make sure that you go out and get this. This is a very important step, and we want to make sure that every one of the contacts is covered with dielectric grease. Okay, so we've set our controller address, we put some dielectric grease in there. We're going to go ahead and take our MyFX harness, plug it in. With the dielectric grease in there, you're going to have to wiggle it a little bit. It's okay if you see some grease spill out, that's actually good. Wiggle it until you hear it click on both sides. There you can see, you want to make sure that's clicked into place and the receivers on both sides. And we're going to take our little controller and we'll stick it in here. Now, there's a couple things that we're going to have to do. One is, these are all marked. This M12 connector says switch. This is the one, we're going to run it right through this little opening right here, and we're going to connect it to the lift switch that we just installed. Okay, we're going to bring our the remainder of our electronic cables, that is our power and CAN connection and our driver cable, we're going to route them underneath over here so they come out through the hole that's made available for electronic cables to come through, and we're going to tie it up with the rest of the electronic cables coming off the exact merge row unit. We'll go ahead and reinstall the housing. And so now we have all components except for the driver and the CAN connection. They're installed inside the plant row unit. Our load sensor, our lift switch, and our MyFX controller. We're going to run these up here, and we'll simply, there's a couple of holes here on either side of the exact merge row unit where we can zip tie these down to this bracket. This driver cable, we're going to bring around here. You want to keep it underneath and tight. We're going to bring it down behind the 2 hydraulic cables, bring it around the solenoid. We're going to bring over, and we're going to install this guy here. There's a swivel on here. You want to swivel it up, and we're going to run our electronic up through here so that we're never running the risk of getting it pinched. And then we're going to zip tie it to our 2 hydraulic hoses. Okay, so now we've installed all of our electronic components on the row, the computer, load sensor, lift switch. We run our cables up and we've zip tied them. We want to make sure that we zip tie everything up tight here. And additionally, once we get our row-by-row hoses connected, we want to make sure that this is zip tied up here tight up here as well, because we don't ever want to run the risk of this bolt getting up into these hydraulic hoses. So make sure they're up tight, up near the top of the upper cradle of the downforce actuator. Now we're going to go and we're going to start going across the toolbar with our row-to-row electronics and hydraulic hoses. Okay, now we have all of our controllers, all of our load sensors, all of our lift switch, and all of our cabling assembled up here, and now all we have left is to install our row-by-row components. So as I said in the beginning of the video, we're going to start with our 25 amp T's and our 25 amp cables, and we're going to work our way to the outside of the toolbar where we're going to use our 13 amp T's and cables. So we're going to start, if you'll recall, we've already set up our control system coming into the center. In the center here we have our hub. I don't know if you can see it from where you are right there, but there's our little hub here, that black box. Don't pull it out. There you go. There's that black box that's coming in from our main power and CAN cable. When we tuck that back in here, when everything is done, we're going to want to zip tie all this stuff down tight. Okay, now all planters are going to have individually linked electronic cables. This is a 30-inch planter, and so we have 30-inch cables. For the most part, we do have a couple of things where we're going to have to go over top pivot points and around the forward pivot when the planter folds up. Okay, so we've installed our first cable. We're now going to insert it into this side of our T, making sure once again we have trunk, and drop. In this case, it's simple because our drop is the smaller connector. So we're going to take our large connector and put it into the trunk of our 25 amp T. The 1775, there's actually a nice little spot right underneath behind the Flying W where we're going to be able to tuck this. Okay. You may want to put a little dielectric grease in there also if we're going to be inverting our T. We want to make sure that if we do have water getting into the system, we never want to have water getting into our contacts. So it is a good practice to always put a little bit of dielectric grease inside of your push to connect connectors. On most John Deere planters, the rear toolbar here before the fold, we usually have 4 or 6, especially on 30 inches, we're going to have 4 row units. We're always going to want to run both our hydraulics and our electronics from the center of the planter outward. So when we get to where it folds, we're going to have to bring the cable back toward the center and then run it out to the wing. On the Exact-Emerge planter, it's actually a shorter length. We do have a standard 180-inch cable. So in this case, you probably are going to have to put a wrap around like one loop and tuck it up underneath the central section of the planter. On a standard 1770 NT or a Bauer planter, you won't have to do that. It's going to take that full amount of length in order to run it back to the center of the planter, back around the wing to the unit next to it. Okay, so you can see already on this center section here, we've installed the T on this row. On the row adjacent to it, we've run our electronics up through here, and here's our T. This is where we're going to install our 15-foot cable. We're going to tip it back, we're going to run it back behind here, back to the center, and run it out the wing. Okay, so we've run our 15-foot cable, run it back to the center. Kevin did put one loop back there up underneath the central fill tank here. We've run it back over here, and here's where we got our 15-foot cable. We're going to run that into another large T. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3 large T's on this planter. Run that through here, and we'll connect our drop. You may want to leave zip ties off until you're done with the entire planter. It's a little bit easier to move cables around if you need to move them around, and then zip tie everything down after you've installed all components. Okay, so this is the last large T. At this point, we're going to step down to our 13 amp T. Here's our adapter cable. Okay, it's going to have one of our large connectors on one end and one of our small connectors on the other. We're simply going to attach it in the same way. We'll attach to our T on this row. This is the first row on the wing. First row on the wing. We'll snap it into our small T. So from this point, we're just going to continue to run our small T's out to the end of the planter. We're going to go ahead and install these, and we'll put in our terminating resistors, and then we'll begin with our hydraulic hoses. Okay, we're at the end of the toolbar. So here we have to put our terminating resistor in the last T. This is the last row, row number 1, left-hand side of the planter. We go ahead and put that terminating resistor in here, and there we're done. And that's the end of our electronic connections. Now we'll move on to our hydraulic connections. Okay, so we've installed all of our electronics now, and the last step that we want to do, you can do it either way. If you want to install your hydraulics first, that's fine too. But this is the last step for us in this installation video. We're going to install our hydraulics. Once again, notice that we've marked this guy green for return. We've marked this guy yellow for pressure. Recall from a little bit earlier in the video, we installed our filter. This is the T that's coming off of our filter right here. Here is the T that's coming off of our return line. Both of these are extending forward to the draft arms up to the front of the tractor. So we're simply going to start teeing across. In the same way we teed across our electronics, we're going to tee across our hydraulics, both pressure and return. And once again, I will remind people that I do encourage you strongly in order to mark these guys with your green and yellow, because if you don't mark them, you get yourself into a real pickle trying to figure out which is which later on. If you get them crisscrossed anywhere in the system, it will not function properly. It may not function at all. So definitely want to make sure that you mark those if at all possible. Okay, to connect our row by row, we're going to use these little -4 O-ring face seal tees. Okay, we're going to have one each for pressure and return. On the ends of your RFX actuators hoses, you're going to see these two red caps. Try not to remove them until you're ready to install the hoses. And for all hydraulic components, you want to make sure that you're very careful. If you drop these in sand, please make sure that you rinse them off with some type of solvent. We want to make sure that we don't have any chance of sand or small particulate soil getting inside of these tees or inside of the hydraulic hoses. It will damage the valves. At this point, you may want to get those shop towels out, because it's very likely you're going to get your fingers oily. Okay, in the same way that we ran our electronics toward the wing, after the center section, back toward the center and out to the wing, we're going to do the same thing with our hydraulic hoses. One end of this 15-foot hose has got a 90-degree connector on it. That's so you can attach to our T here and feed it back, bring it 180 back to the center, and then bring it around right here to this row. Once again, so that we're always pushing oil outward from the center of the planter. Alrighty, well, we have completed our installation here. We've run all our pressure and return lines all the way out to the end of the wing. We've capped it off on the last T over here. In some cases, you'll have a 90-degree fitting. In some cases, you'll have a T. One other option is that when you do start up the system the first time, turn your flow all the way down. You can open this T and you can bleed this system. It may not be 100% required, although it's probably not bad to do it as well. So you can go ahead and bleed the system if you'd like. If you do see it being sluggish or misbehaving, you want to go ahead and try and give it a bleed, but it may very well be that you'll be able to turn it on and you'll immediately be able to actuate the cylinders. Thanks for joining us for this little installation video. Thank you to Kevin for helping us install. We will be talking about a MaxEmerge series of, one of the older units, the MaxEmerge Pro and the MaxEmerge XP, in a different video because there are some slight differences in the installation on the Max Pro and the Max XP that's different from the ExactEmerge planter. Go ahead and look forward to that. If you have any other questions, you can call us at 800-554-0007, or you can email us at advice, A-D-V-I-C-E, advice@dawnequipment.com. So for that, we'll say goodbye and thank you guys.